The door to Holding 3 whispered shut behind Nolan Reed, and his wrists felt the bite of the chain like a memory with teeth. The fluorescent lights hummed with a tired kind of judgment. He had written the letter in pencil that morning, the paper thin as breath, folded twice, hidden where no one searched anymore inside the sole of a shoe that didn't dream of running. He told himself he could still make the hope wish count, even here, even now. Outside the glass, a red light blinked once, as if it knew a secret. A key turned somewhere far away, and in Nolan's chest, something heavier than iron began to move, then stopped, as footsteps approached his door and paused. Nolan Reed had the kind of face the world forgot until it needed someone to blame. He grew up learning the quiet rules, how to be polite to a locked window, how to nod at the person who held the list, how to carry boxes for rooms he would never enter. When the factory closed, he learned a different lesson, that truthful men could be sealed inside a number and a jumpsuit. The charge on paper was everything and nothing intent in the shadow of an act he did not perform. He had signed things he didn't understand, and the understanding arrived only after the ink had dried. He marked time by sound, the hum of the fluorescent, the cough 2 cells down that came after midnight like an old ritual, the boiler's exhale that made metal talk in the walls. His cell cracked the day into manageable slices: morning count, tray clatter, line, yard, line, stillness. In the stillness, he rewrote the letter in his head, the one he could not mail through legal ways, because legal ways had a habit of getting lost or edited by hands that didn't know his mother's street. He rewrote the letter in pencil on paper he traded for a favor and folded it like a secret he could lift with one hand. Nolan's wound was not a dramatic one. It was the kind that doesn't bleed so much as echo. He had testified once, thinking truth was a light that could be aimed and turned on. The light had turned on him, and the prosecutor's hand had shaped his life like wet clay. He learned late that stories depended on who paid the narrator. He learned later still that silence was a currency too. In the mirror of the stainless sink, he memorized his own eyes, because no one else needed to. The chain around his wrists was not the only chain. There was the chain of paperwork that linked rooms and names and boxes to check. There was the chain of nights when sleep circled the yard and did not enter. There was the chain of things he didn't say because saying them would require a witness. And the witnesses here were tired of carrying other people's storms. He kept his voice for the letter and his breath for the wish. Just before lights out, Nolan would lie on the narrow cot and rehearse one sentence. Let this be the man I was supposed to be. He didn't know who he meant to hear it. He only knew it needed to be said in, a place that counted. The world loved paperwork. Maybe it would love a prayer wrapped in a different word. He didn't pray. He made the hope wish. He made it because a wish could walk under a door. The day the red light blinked for him, a flood had coasted through the lower storage, lifting boxes and sending labels into new hierarchies. An inventory officer, white shirt under gray vest, had rolled a cart into Holding 3 with a clipboard and a smell like paper and coffee. He stayed longer than people usually stayed near Nolan's door. He tapped a pencil against glass in slow clicks that counted out some private math. Nolan kept his gaze somewhere between the floor and the officer's reflection. Looking full on made some men feel challenged. Looking away made other men believe you weren't there. There was a rumor that the flood had forced the property room to move evidence to a makeshift shelf by the visiting hall, which had forced another set of hands to touch the sealed boxes, which had forced someone to notice a discrepancy in chain of custody. The rumor had traveled slow, unsure of itself, then sped up at the phrase, "missing signature," then slowed again at the phrase, "no one will fix this." Rumors had their own time zone. The officer in the gray vest pushed the intercom button. His voice cracked the glass with politeness. "Reed, you wrote a letter?" Nolan's breath paused like it had been told to wait in the hall. The letter was hidden in his shoe, the one the laundry had not taken yet. "No mail today," the guard had said earlier. Nolan had not argued. He never argued with sentences that short. He liked them for their honesty. They ended as soon as they began, and no one expected mercy from them. The officer didn't wait for an answer. Someone forwarded a note. "It says you filed an internal request to review a transfer manifest from the night of the fire at district storage. It cites an error in the custody log." Nolan felt the walls take a step closer. He had never filed a request. He didn't know how. The letter he wrote asked for something softer, that the person who mattered might hear him. But an internal request, that was a different door. He shook his head, but only slightly, so as not to shake anything else loose. The officer clicked again. "Directive says I ask if you want to add a statement to your file about the manifest." He stared at Nolan with the curious fatigue of someone who didn't ask a question because he was curious, but because the form required a signature near an answer box. Nolan's heart learned a new speed. Somewhere, something he didn't write had moved on his behalf. Somewhere the chain had slipped. He thought of the pencil sentence inside his shoe, the letter folded like an apology, and he felt the Hope Wish shoulder up beside him as if it had weight now. His mouth moved before he chose words. "Yes," he said, and his voice was careful. "Add that I want the manifest. Reviewed by an outside audit. Add that the signature on the third page looks like it was layered after the date." He did not know this for sure. He knew what forgery looked like in the unimportant world of time cards and leave slips. He was betting that the important world shared similar handwriting. The officer's pencil hesitated at outside. That word annoyed systems. It invited daylight where only fluorescent hum usually lived. The officer wrote it anyway. He clicked off the intercom and walked away to the red light, which blinked as if closing an eye. Nolan's skin cooled, then heated, then cooled again. Somewhere beyond his door, a small fight had begun that did not involve fists. The next days reassembled themselves. A different guard did count. The yard opened late with an apology that felt borrowed. In the line for trays, Nolan noticed a missing face, and then noticed that the missing face had left the sound of a missing cough lingering near the milk crate bench. The world rearranged and thought no one would mind. On the fourth morning, a copy of a form arrived tucked under his breakfast plate like a dull gift. It listed what had been moved from storage during the flood and where it went. He read it twice, slow. 2 boxes had been entered as transferred to external review. The signature next to that entry belonged to a person whose title was long enough to hide in. Nolan didn't know if that was good. He knew only that movement meant opportunity, and opportunity in here tended to break its own ankles if you stared too long. He waited for a shoe to drop that wasn't his. It dropped at last period, when the door opened and he was led chained and silent down a corridor that smelled like time. Not to the lawyer room, not to the med bay, to the visitation hall, closed for cleaning, bleach whispering in the air. On the table sat 2 boxes with their lids off, labels that meant little to him until they meant too much. Evidence from the night the fire knocked out district storage, the night the narrative was built. A technician who did not share a name placed a folder in front of him, as if offering a menu to someone who couldn't order. "You'll confirm these chain of custody logs are the ones the officer referenced," the technician said. His voice knew careful, like an old friend. Nolan read, even though reading here felt like stealing. The logs had line numbers and initials and arrows, where lines wished they were different. On the third page, the received by signature met the date like they were late to each other. Ink flow went thin where it should have gone steady. He had seen that kind of meeting before, when someone added a number to a time card in a car parked under yellow light. In a small life, forgery had small tells. In a big life, they still showed. His fingertip hovered above the paper, careful not to touch. "That's layered," he said. The pen lifted. "It looks like it was written after the date. Dried." He heard his own voice and didn't recognize it right away. It had learned to stand up when it usually sat down. The technician didn't agree or disagree. "Records say these boxes were moved the night of the fire. Cameras were down. A backup generator failed." He let the facts sit there and stare. "If a judge asks you to swear to your certainty, could you?" Nolan's throat closed for a second. The world loved certainty when it needed to dismiss doubt. He looked again at the paper, at the way ink had traveled. He thought of the chain of events that had knocked through his life like a slow avalanche. He imagined saying yes, and then failing at proof, and how that would build a wall taller than the one outside the yard. He imagined saying no, and living with the way that word would taste forever. "I can swear I saw this kind of thing where I worked. I can swear it's likely. I can swear I deserve the chance to have someone with a magnifier tell me I'm not crazy." He heard the edge in his voice and decided to keep it. The technician closed the folder and opened another. Inside was a sealed envelope labeled with Nolan's case number. It had been sealed when he went away. It was sealed now. "You know what's in here?" the technician asked. Nolan shook his head. His heart gave him a warning tap. "Contents: a disposable lighter found behind the alley unit. Fingerprints partial. The chain shows it left storage for lab, but no lab report made it into your file. That gap looks like an ocean." Nolan felt the room tilt. The lighter had been the crown jewel of a narrative that needed a hand too near the fire. If the lab report didn't exist, there was a space where proof should be. In that space, a person could stand up and ask to be seen. "What happens now?" he asked. The technician did not answer. Bleach air moved like a small tide. Somewhere, a bell rang for a shift in some other corridor. The letter in the shoe burned cold, and the hope wish waited at the door as if it had been invited. If any of this reached anyone outside these walls, if the red lights blink found ears, someone might lean closer. The twist did not arrive as a dramatic crash. It arrived as a note typed badly on old paper, slid into Nolan's meal tray under the apple. The note said, "We pulled a burned USB from box B7. Partial recovery shows correspondence that contradicts sworn statements. The timestamps are off by hours. A junior clerk flagged it and was told to archive." Nolan sat very still, because stillness here was considered good behavior. And good behavior made people less likely to examine how you got by. The note might have been a trick. Or it might have been the one honest thing the week had sent him. He lifted the apple, read the line again, and felt an old world reopen. The one where time stamps meant everything, and a misaligned hour could move fate. That night, the cough 2 cells down did not arrive. Quiet replaced it like a coin placed on a table. Nolan counted his breaths, then folded the letter one more time in his mind, adding a sentence he had never written. If truth knocks and the door doesn't open, it turns the knob on its own. He had always believed truth waited politely. He was revising his belief. The following morning, the gray vest officer returned, accompanied by a different silence. He did not press the intercom. He unlocked the door and entered with too much care, as if the air might break. He placed 2 photographs on the bunk. One showed a charred USB with a melted sleeve. The other showed a printed screen with offset timestamps and a subject line that carried a whiff of fear. Reclose B7 quickly. The sender and recipient were redacted with black so heavy it dented the paper. Chain of custody is a living thing, the officer said, not looking at Nolan. Sometimes it grows into places you can't see. Sometimes it withers in a drawer. He waited, as if for a confession, then added, "A review board might consider this." Nolan traced the edges of the photographs with his eyes. No one had brought him proof before. People had brought him outcomes, schedules, corrections, refusals printed in elegant font. Proof was a new shape. He didn't trust it, but he was willing to starve less around it. "What does a review board change?" he asked. "Sometimes nothing. Sometimes everything." The officer left without waiting to see which one this would be. The door closed with a precise note, like a metronome acknowledging a tempo change. Days loosened in his hands after that. Someone moved him to a different tier with brighter bulbs and a window that understood sky in a vaguer way. In the yard, a man with a mop leaned too near and said, in a voice faint as pencil dust, "A clerk resigned." The mop moved away like a boat leaving a dock. Nolan said nothing. He understood that even whispers had employment. At the hearing, if there would be a hearing, they would say his name and ask him to repeat facts like a hymn. He rehearsed his facts at night. Job, shutdown, fire, signature, box, gap. He reversed them and rehearsed again. He looked for places to stand when someone tried to push him toward an easy no. He did not practice the word innocent. He practiced the word patient. He imagined saying, "Open the envelope and read the blank space where the lab report should be." And the phrase felt like a key in his mouth. Midway through the 6th week of this new season, a courier arrived wearing a badge with letters that stood like tall men. The courier did not look at Nolan. He lifted the envelope labeled with Nolan's case number and placed it on the table between 2 men whose names never appeared because they behaved like furniture. The seal broke with a sound that made Nolan's lungs forget their job. The technician with no name slid out a thinner envelope from inside a report in lab font with numbers like, "Careful steps." It was dated the week after the fire and initialed by a person who did not know where that report would sleep for years. "Partial prints, insufficient for match," the report said. "Chemical residue inconsistent with fuel traces." The words were simple. The door they opened was not. Nolan's hands trembled without moving. The world did not tilt. Tilting would imply someone had grabbed it and shaken it. The world remained level, and he was the one asked to accept that it had always been so. He felt angry at physics for keeping a straight face. The board would decide if a new trial, if a vacated list of numbers, if time returned in small installments or large. The board would meet in a room that smelled like carpet squares. He could not enter that room. He would enter only the result. He understood that. He also understood that the chain which had held him in place had cracked at a link he could not see before, and if the chain could crack once, it could crack again. The letter had waited long enough in his shoe. He knew this because every step now felt like stepping on a heart. The night before the review, Nolan took the shoe in his hands and peeled back the insole with the gentle cruelty of a surgeon. He retrieved the letter, edges softened by sweat and walking. He unfolded it and discovered he had written something a person could live inside. "Whoever holds this," it began, and he smiled at the formality, at the way people like him wrote to the world like it was a desk clerk. "I am Nolan Reed. I am not an idea. I am a person made of rooms. The night of the fire, I was in one room. The story put me in another. Please check the chain. Please read what is missing inside the lab report. Please let me earn a day that is not a rehearsal." He had intended to send the letter to a place where letters broke into tiny pieces of data and floated across a switchboard. But he kept it because the world did not accept his tone the last time. He had intended the phrase, "The hope wished to be a private thing," said under breath against concrete. But now the wish had found ears through papers and photos and the burned USB, and he realized there was no way back to silence that would feel like honor. If a person is offered daylight after memorizing the dark's schedule, he cannot decline without losing a part of his spine. He folded the letter again and pressed it flat, as if smoothing a shirt for an interview. He placed it not in his shoe this time, but in the breast pocket of the jumpsuit, where some men kept photographs. He didn't have photographs. He had sentences. At first count, the guard said his number differently, somehow less lazy with the digits. At second count, the gray vest officer did not appear. Another form of silence took his place. After dinner, the door opened to the hall with the red light. Nolan moved as far as the chain would allow without dragging it. The air was cool enough to make skin feel new. They escorted him into a room with chairs that squeaked their opinions. He sat across from the absence of a judge. There were screens that displayed documents without showing who was reading them. A voice on a speaker began with the authority of a door that never once squeaked. It listed the new materials. It asked about the signature, the timestamps, the lab report. It asked how he came to request an outside review. Nolan answered with care that felt like lifting glass. Then the voice asked a question that did not belong to any form. "Mr. Reed, if released, what would you do with your days?" Every answer he had rehearsed turned to dull coins. He thought of his mother's street, of a window that once held a plant with leaves shaped like small hands. He thought of the factory and the time clock and the feeling of paying a bus fare with 4 different coins. He thought of the USB, the burned sleeve, the clerk who resigned. He thought of the cough that had not returned. "I would be a person," he said. "I would be a person who is not a memo." He let the silence see if it could hold him. It held. "Your case will be remanded to county," the voice said at last, and the word remanded felt like someone had thrown a ball and remembered mid-air that it belonged to him. "There will be a hearing. You will be transported next week." The line clicked, and the room returned to the hum of fluorescent judgment. He looked down at his hands and saw the chain. He looked up at the door and imagined it without a lock. The bus to county rode like a thought that had already decided its conclusion. Nolan watched a ribbon of landscape that had not cared when he left and did not cheer now. He felt the pull of names he wouldn't say. The courtroom was smaller than the shows promised. The benches felt tired of carrying knees. His name sounded different in county. It lost its echo and gained weight. The judge read from a sheet that had lived in a folder long enough to have neighbors. New evidence, the judge said, and the phrase did not apologize for how late it had arrived. Lawyers, he did not learn their names and did not give them his, argued in a tone that polished their own shoes. The burned USB became a place to stop and circle. The signature became a parlor trick no one wanted to defend. The lab report became a guest who had been kept outside in the rain and now stood dripping on the carpet, looking at everyone. When the judge spoke the words vacate and motion granted, Nolan did not stand or weep or fall into hands that would have felt like ceremonies. He listened to his chain as it was removed and felt the skin beneath it like a shoreline revealed when tied with draws. He lifted the letter from his breast pocket. He did not open it. He held it the way some men hold a photograph when the person in it has walked into the next room and will return soon. Walking out was not a parade. It was steps. A door opened to daylight he recognized from childhood, only thinner. The sky looked like it had been washed 2 times too many. He stood still and did not immediately leave the small shade just outside the door because the world did not yet know what to do with him. He waited as if for a bus, as if for permission. When no one offered any, he took a step toward a street that did not remember him. He read the letter there in daylight for the first time, as if he were the one it had been addressed to. "I am not an idea," it ended. "I am a person made of rooms. If you find this, please tell him that his wish is still breathing." The edges fluttered. He understood then that the hope wish had never been about the exact result. It had been about breathing on his own time again. Evenings found Nolan walking the long perimeter of a park that did not ask questions. He rented a room from a woman who believed in cash and quiet, in that order. He learned new rules: where to stand in line at the shelter that served soup without asking how you came to need it, how to navigate a phone tree that wanted you to give it words it had already chosen for you, where the bus slowed just enough to let tired men imagine they could catch it if they ran. He looked for work with a face the world had seen before and decided to see differently. He swept floors where conversations lifted and settled like birds. He inventoried shelves with the patience of a person who knew that numbers sometimes changed their minds. He attended a class because he could, because the door was open, because the instructor said, "Everyone gets a chance at the board." And he believed her. He learned a new phrase for an old feeling: durable hope. He mailed the letter at last, not to a court or a board or an office where elbows made decisions, but to an address that would not argue with him, his own. He wrote the rooming house number under his name on the return address, folded the letter again, and placed it in the mailbox on the corner where bikes leaned like tired punctuation. When it returned days later, stamped and traveled, he opened it and read it at his small table with the wobbly leg. The stamp's ink smudged against his thumb. He kept the envelope under the pillow like a mild, legal kind of contraband. Sometimes he would wake at 3 and listen for the hum of fluorescent lights that weren't there. He would hear instead the radiator's effortful breath, the city sighing through window seams, his own heartbeat learning how to be only a heartbeat. He would place his palm flat against his chest and say, without moving his lips, words that had waited unreasonably long, "Let this be the man I was supposed to be." He didn't know who heard, or if hearing mattered. The wish itself was the hearing. On an afternoon when the sky considered rain and decided on patience, Nolan visited the sidewalk outside the county building. He stood in the small shade that had held him once and watched strangers exit through the door that had become a fact of his life. They came out the way people always come out of those doors. eyes scanning for a face, hands hunting for a pocket, shoulders doing math with weight. He did not recognize any of them. He recognized the way the red light above the side entrance blinked once, then doubted itself, then blinked again. He felt no anger at it. Lights do their jobs. Men decide what words to put on their own days. He had no speech to give, no dramatic oath to record under the camera of his mind. He only had the ordinary act of buying a coffee from a vendor who did not demand a story, sitting on a step that had not earned him, watching the city continue. The steam from the cup made a small cloud near his face. He wondered if someone, somewhere, still believed that the chain could not be undone, that the letter could not be found, that a hope wish was a child's mistake. He considered writing them a letter and decided against it. Some things can only be understood by walking out of a door you thought would never open. Back in his room, the radiator made old bones noises. He hung his jumpsuit, the one he was released in, on a nail near the window, not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as a sentence he had finished. The fabric remembered him less each day. When wind pushed into the room and lifted the sleeve, it looked almost like a wave, like a farewell that didn't need a witness. Nolan lay on the narrow bed that was his by agreement and time. He held the letter against his chest without reading. The glue on the envelope had given up. It opened a little at the corner like a quiet smile. He listened for the cough from 2 cells down and heard instead the faint noise of a neighbor's TV making promises it couldn't keep. He breathed in and tasted the ghost of bleach and the honest air of a room without rules painted on the walls. He exhaled and felt the day move a fraction closer to him. He did not know what would become of the officer in the gray vest, or the technician with no name, or the clerk who resigned. He did not need biographies for them. He was not a librarian of other people's outcomes. He knew only that in a world of forms and fluorescent hum, a wish had survived by borrowing shoes and ink and the slow courage of a man tired of watching doors. He knew that the chain had not been cut by a single blade, but worn by repetition, by the patient friction of truth moving its shoulder against a lie. He closed his eyes and, in the soft dark of a room owned by no one famous, watched the corridor of Holding 3 in his mind. The red light above his old door blinked once, steady, then disappeared. The letter in his hand warmed to his skin. He spoke one line out loud so the air could remember it with him, a line he could live inside and carry outside. This was the prisoner's hope wish, and it's still breathing.